Harlem, New York. 10:47 p.m. Friday, August 12, 1955. The Midnight Palace sat on the corner of 135th and Lenox like a jewel box made of neon and broken promises. Rain streaked the windows, turning the red and gold lights into bleeding watercolors on the wet pavement. Inside, the air hung thick with cigarette smoke, expensive perfume, and the kind of tension that makes smart men check the exits twice. The jazz quartet played soft and low, their brass instruments catching the amber light from crystal chandeliers that had seen better decades. Mayme Johnson stood at the hostess station, her burgundy silk dress catching the light like spilled wine. Pearl earrings, white gloves. The kind of woman who commanded respect simply by existing. The wife of Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the man who controlled every number, every corner, every breath of illegal business in Harlem. She didn't announce herself. Everyone knew. Everyone except Tommy Torino. The club owner was second-generation Italian, mid-30s, with slicked-back hair and a pinky ring that caught the light when he gestured. He'd bought the Midnight Palace 6 months ago with money from a downtown loan shark, believing his cash made him untouchable in a neighborhood he saw as his personal gold mine. When Mayme approached the velvet rope separating the main floor from the VIP section, Torino's eyes traveled from her face to her shoes and back again, slow and deliberate. VIP section's closed, he said, not looking at the half-empty booths behind him. Mayme's companion, her sister Delilah, stepped forward. We have a reservation. Johnson party. Made yesterday. Torino took a long drag from his cigarette, blowing smoke in their direction. Don't see nothing in my book. He made a show of flipping through pages he wasn't reading. The music continued, but conversations at nearby tables began to quiet. People were watching now, sensing the shift in atmosphere, the way animals sense an earthquake before the first tremor. Perhaps you should look again, Mayme said, her voice level, controlled. Torino leaned against the rope post, his voice rising just enough for the surrounding tables to hear. You know what I think? I think you people need to understand something about my establishment. He stepped closer, invading her space. This ain't some juke joint down on 125th. We got class here. Standards. His smile showed too many teeth. Maybe try the chicken shack around the block. I hear they don't mind when your kind gets too comfortable. The words hung in the smoky air like a death sentence. Mayme didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice. She simply adjusted her pearls, turned to Delilah, and said, We're leaving. As they walked toward the exit, Torino called after them, loud enough for the entire club to hear. Tell your husband, this is my house. Some of us still remember when people knew their place. Mayme stopped at the door, turned, met Torino's eyes across the crowded room. She didn't speak. The look she gave him was the look of a woman memorizing a face for a funeral. She left at 10:52 p.m. By 11:07 p.m., Bumpy Johnson knew everything. By 11:23 p.m., 3 phone calls had been made. By 2:15 a.m., Tommy Torino's world would begin its systematic collapse, and by dawn, the Midnight Palace would be nothing but smoking rubble and a lesson carved in ash about the price of disrespecting Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson's wife. The story of how Tommy Torino lost everything is a warning that history has tried to hide. If you enjoy these deep dives into the underworld, you can support the channel by buying me a coffee using the link in the description. Your support keeps these investigations alive. Now, let's go back to August 12th, 1955. Tommy Torino was born above a bakery in Corona, Queens in 1920, where everyone knew your secrets and nobody repeated them to the police. His father ran numbers for small-time Italian operators. His mother scrubbed floors for families who pretended not to know where the rent came from. By 12, Tommy was carrying betting slips between rooms, memorizing odds faster than homework. School ended at 14. Money became the only subject that mattered. Through the 40s, he worked as Tommy 2 Tickets, a reliable bookmaker for factory hands and dock workers. He dressed sharp, kept clean notebooks, and survived by never being important enough to eliminate. By early 1955, when the Midnight Palace came available after its owner died of a heart attack, Tommy saw his chance. He borrowed $15,000 from Vincent Scarpelli, a Lucchese-connected loan shark, added his savings, and purchased the club outright. The Midnight Palace occupied profitable middle ground in Harlem's nightlife ecosystem, a mid-tier establishment where working professionals mixed with downtown whites seeking authentic jazz without genuine danger. The previous owner had maintained careful balance, understanding that Harlem operated under unwritten rules having nothing to do with city ordinances and everything to do with respect. Tommy understood none of this. He saw only revenue streams and profit margins. Within his first month, he implemented quality control measures. Black patrons were steered toward tables near kitchens and bathrooms. Drink prices fluctuated based on skin color. The velvet rope became a color line enforced with manufactured excuses. When questioned, Tommy shrugged and said he was running a business, not a charity. His profits climbed. His arrogance climbed faster. What Tommy failed to comprehend was the invisible architecture governing Harlem's underworld. Every numbers operation, policy bank, after-hours card game, every business touching the illegal economy answered to one man, Ellsworth Raymond Johnson. Bumpy didn't announce authority with violence. His reputation shaped behavior before conflict could emerge. He was the regulator, the judge, the final word on disputes the legal system couldn't touch. No business operated, no racket breathed, no disrespect occurred without consequences in his territory. As profits swelled through summer 1955, Tommy convinced himself his Italian connections provided immunity. He'd drop names at card games, mention Scarpelli, imply protection from downtown families. The truth was simpler and more dangerous. The Italians didn't care about a small Harlem nightclub as long as loan payments arrived on time. At the center of Bumpy's code stood an absolute principle. His family was untouchable. Mayme Johnson wasn't just Bumpy's wife. She was the embodiment of his humanity, the line between criminal and man. In 1952, a drug dealer named Curtis Webb propositioned Mayme outside a grocery store, not recognizing her. Webb disappeared for 3 days. When he returned, he walked with a permanent limp and never explained what happened. The message was carved into Harlem's collective consciousness. You could negotiate with Bumpy, compete with Bumpy, but you never disrespected his wife. Bumpy's philosophy on retribution was unique. Street thugs broke bones. Bumpy Johnson broke lives. He believed true punishment wasn't physical pain, which fades, but systematic destruction, which endures. Respect for his family wasn't negotiable, and violations were met with precision, not street violence. 2 weeks before Mayme walked through his doors, numbers runner Eddie Moss stopped by the Midnight Palace. He leaned close to Tommy at the bar and offered quiet advice. Just watch how you talk to certain people in this neighborhood. Tommy laughed, straightened his tie, and met Eddie's eyes with dangerous confidence. I don't care if it's Bumpy Johnson himself. This is my club, my rules. Eddie finished his drink and walked into the Harlem night. The warning had been delivered. The education would follow. The trumpet player noticed first. Marcus Reed had worked the Midnight Palace every Friday for 3 years, understanding the room's rhythms like chord progressions. When Mayme Johnson approached the velvet rope, his fingers faltered mid-note. The saxophone followed, then piano, until the quartet dissolved into silence. They recognized when music became inappropriate. This wasn't entertainment. This was witnessing. Behind the bar, Raymond Clark turned away and began polishing glasses that didn't need polishing. 23 years in Harlem establishments taught him survival meant knowing when not to see things. His hands moved mechanically while his stomach twisted. At nearby tables, conversation stopped mid-sentence. Dorothy Williams, a schoolteacher who came every Friday, gripped her husband's hand. She recognized the gravity immediately. This wasn't rudeness. This was a man signing his death warrant. Tommy Torino's insults carried calculated cruelty beyond simple racial slurs. He stepped into Mayme's personal space, exhaling cigarette smoke directly into her face. His voice projected across the hushed room, ensuring maximum audience for the humiliation. He commented on her burgundy dress, suggesting it was too expensive for someone of her background. When he mentioned the chicken shack, he gestured toward the door like shooing a stray dog. Each word was designed to strip away dignity systematically, reducing her from Bumpy Johnson's wife to a caricature. The physical intimidation was deliberate. He blocked her path, invaded her composure, made her ask permission in front of watching strangers. When he said people should remember their place, he looked around the room, inviting others to share his contempt. It was theater of degradation, performed for an audience that understood its fatal implications. Mayme's internal conflict played across her face for anyone trained to read such signs. She understood Bumpy's history with absolute clarity. She'd witnessed aftermath of disrespect before, seen men disappear, businesses close, lives systematically dismantled. Part of her wanted to respond, to remind this fool who he was addressing. But wisdom chose de-escalation. She adjusted her pearls, a gesture of composure, and left quietly. Perhaps silence would prevent the inevitable. She knew better. The phone call reached Bumpy at 11:07 p.m. Mayme's voice was steady, factual, detached. She recounted events like a court reporter, without emotion or editorializing. When she finished, silence filled the line. 37 seconds of absolute quiet. Mayme counted them, knowing her husband was processing, cataloging, building his case. Then, one question. What exactly did he say to you? She repeated Tommy's words verbatim. Bumpy's voice remained clinical, a prosecutor gathering evidence. Where were you standing? How close did he get? Who else heard? Each detail was extracted, examined, filed away. This wasn't anger. This was documentation. The summons went out at 11:23 p.m. 3 phone calls, each brief, identical, my apartment. Now, Junie Bird arrived at 11:41 p.m., Illinois Gordon at 11:48 p.m., Nat Pettigrew at 11:52 p.m. The meeting lasted 8 minutes. Bumpy didn't explain context or justify response. The assignments were surgical, precise. Junie, I need his suppliers. Illinois, his permits. Nat, his exits. No questions were asked. The men nodded and disappeared into the Harlem night. Bumpy sat alone afterward, staring at a wedding photograph on the mantel. Both younger, both smiling. He reached for the phone, dialed from memory. When the voice answered, Bumpy spoke with absolute finality. The Midnight Palace. I want it gone. No bodies, no witnesses, just ashes. The line went dead at exactly 12:47 a.m. At 8:30 a.m. on August 13th, Bumpy Johnson sat across from a man Harlem knew only as the accountant. Gerald Finch had spent 22 years buried in City Hall's licensing bureau before early retirement, maintaining duplicate records of every permit, violation, and bureaucratic secret that crossed his desk. His basement apartment in Washington Heights housed filing cabinets containing New York's administrative vulnerabilities. Information was his currency, leverage his product. The Midnight Palace file spread across the table like autopsy findings. Fire safety certificate expired 4 months prior, never renewed. Property taxes showed 2/4 of delinquent payments, totaling $8,000. The liquor license existed only through monthly envelopes to Inspector William Donahue, a corrupt official drowning in gambling debts. Most damaging was the basement poker operation, generating unreported income, completely unknown to state gaming authorities. Tommy Torino's empire was built on violations, held together by bribes. Bumpy studied the documents with surgical precision, identifying 3 pressure points that would create systematic collapse. Cut the liquor supply and the club couldn't operate legally, trigger a legitimate fire inspection, and violations would force immediate closure. Eliminate police protection, and the illegal gambling became prosecutable liability. Each pressure point would activate the next, creating a domino effect requiring no direct violence. One complication emerged from Finch's notes. Vincent Scarpelli, the Lucchese, connected loan shark who financed Tommy's purchase. Attacking Tommy could be interpreted as attacking Italian interests. The Underworld maintained fragile peace between black and Italian operations through careful territorial respect. One miscalculation could ignite warfare across multiple boroughs. At noon, Bumpy entered the Palma Boys Social Club in East Harlem. Anthony Fat Tony Salerno conducted business from his corner table over espresso and pastries. The conversation was coded, layered with implications neither man stated directly. "I have a domestic matter requiring attention," Bumpy said. Salerno stirred his espresso slowly. "Domestic matters shouldn't concern our mutual interests. The matter involves disrespect shown to my wife at an establishment financed by your associate Scarpelli." Salerno's stirring stopped. Disrespecting a man's wife transcended business protocol. After hearing the details, he nodded once. "Make it look like bad luck, not bad blood. Scarpelli gets his money back." Permission granted. The execution began with precision. At 2:15 p.m., Tommy's liquor supplier received an anonymous federal tip regarding tax evasion. Ears agents arrived within hours, freezing operations pending investigation. Every club supplied by Goldstein distributors would need alternative sources immediately. At 4:47 p.m., Fire Inspector Thomas Brennan conducted a surprise inspection. His report documented 17 serious violations: blocked exits, faulty wiring, inadequate sprinkler coverage. The club faced immediate closure pending corrections estimated at $15,000. At 6:23 p.m., 3 patrolmen on Tommy's payroll received transfer orders to precincts in Brooklyn and the Bronx, effective immediately. The reassignments came through proper channels, signed by a deputy commissioner who owed Bumpy favors. No explanations were provided. By 8 p.m., Tommy Torino sat in his office surrounded by violation notices and disconnection warnings. He tried calling Scarpelli. No answer. He tried Inspector Donahue. Line disconnected. He tried the transferred patrolman. Gone. The walls were closing systematically, but Tommy couldn't identify the architect. Everything appeared coincidental, bureaucratic misfortune compressed into impossible timing. He stared at the mounting papers, hands trembling slightly, as his office clock ticked toward the final lesson in respect he would ever receive. At 9:00 p.m., on August 13th, Tommy Torino made the decision that sealed his fate. Despite violation notices stacked on his desk and suppliers cut off, he unlocked the Midnight Palace doors. Closing would signal weakness, admission that invisible forces were dismantling his empire. Pride demanded he project strength, even as foundations crumbled beneath him. He straightened his tie, ordered the remaining bartender to keep pouring, and told himself this was temporary bureaucratic harassment. The evening unfolded with apocalyptic undertones. By 9:30 p.m., 2 waitresses and the head bartender had quit without notice, leaving apologies scribbled on order pads. The jazz quartet never arrived, their booking agent claiming sudden illness. The stage remained dark, amplifying the emptiness of half-filled tables. Regular patrons who usually crowded Friday nights stayed conspicuously absent. Harlem's underground network operated faster than telephone lines, spreading word that the Midnight Palace had become dangerous territory. Smart people recognized omens and chose safer establishments. Tommy's desperation became visible in every corner of the operation. He worked behind the bar himself, hands trembling as he watered down the remaining liquor inventory, stretching bottles to serve the handful of tourists who wandered in unaware. In the basement, he pushed the illegal poker game aggressively, raising stakes and demanding cash buy-ins while skimming larger percentages from every pot. His decisions grew erratic, comping drinks for strangers while screaming at busboys, laughing too loudly at jokes nobody told. At 10:30 p.m., the final warning arrived. A young black man in an immaculate charcoal suit walked through the front door, bypassing the hostess stand and approaching Tommy directly. He extended a cream-colored envelope without speaking, then turned and disappeared into the Harlem night. Inside was a single sheet of heavy bond paper with typed instructions. St. Nicholas Avenue Baptist Church, Sunday 11:00 a.m. Come alone. Apologize to Mrs. Johnson in front of the congregation. This is your last chance. This was the exit ramp, the final opportunity for redemption offered by a man who rarely gave second chances. An apology, public, humbling, but survivable. Tommy read the note twice, his face reddening. Pride, that fatal Italian sin, overrode every survival instinct screaming in his brain. He tore the paper into pieces, throwing them onto the polished floor like confetti. Nobody tells Tommy Torino what to do. He shouted to his remaining staff, "This is my place." By 11:45 p.m., the last confused patrons had drifted away, sensing the party was over. Tommy locked the front doors and retreated to his office with a bottle of whiskey he hadn't watered down. He drank straight from the neck, convincing himself he had called Bumpy Johnson's bluff. He was still standing. The club was still standing. Tomorrow he would fix the permits, find new suppliers, rebuild his empire. At exactly midnight, footsteps echoed across the roof above his office. Heavy, deliberate, then stopping. Tommy froze, glass halfway to his mouth, eyes fixed on the ceiling tiles. Silence pressed against his eardrums like physical weight. Then came the smell. Faint at first, then unmistakable. Sharp, chemical, pungent. Gasoline seeping through the floorboards from the basement below, rising like toxic fog. Tommy's eyes widened as understanding finally arrived. This wasn't a bluff. His education in respect was about to begin. At 12:03 a.m., on August 14th, the Midnight Palace began to die. Flames erupted simultaneously in 3 calculated locations. The basement storage room consumed cardboard liquor boxes soaked in accelerant. The kitchen ignited along grease-coated surfaces, and the main electrical panel exploded in a shower of sparks and molten copper. Professional, systematic, engineered for maximum destruction, while maintaining escape routes for exactly 3 minutes. Tommy Torino felt the temperature change first, then saw smoke fingering through the crack beneath his office door. The smell of gasoline intensified, unmistakable now. Panic finally replaced arrogance as he lunged for the nearest fire extinguisher mounted beside the doorframe. He yanked the pin and squeezed the trigger. Nothing. The canister was light, empty, drained days earlier by unseen hands. He grabbed the second extinguisher from the hallway with identical results. Every fire suppression device had been systematically neutralized. Heat pressed against his skin as flames crawled along the corridor ceiling with terrifying speed. Tommy stumbled back to his desk, reaching for the telephone. He dialed the operator frantically. Dead silence. No dial tone. No connection. The phone lines had been severed before the first spark ever formed. His calls for help died in the walls. The main exit was already engulfed, impassable. Smoke thickened, turning every breath into punishment. Tommy's only salvation was the narrow ventilation window facing the alley. He grabbed his desk chair and hurled it through the glass, showering the pavement below with crystalline fragments. Flames licked at his back as he squeezed through the jagged opening, tearing his suit jacket, scraping his arms raw. He dropped 8 feet onto wet concrete, landing hard, coughing violently as fresh air hit smoke-damaged lungs. He stood in the alley, covered in soot and ash, watching his empire transform into smoke and ruin. The neon sign exploded in electrical fury. Windows shattered outward as pressure built inside. His business, his status, his illusion of control burned before his eyes, feeding the Harlem night with orange light. Sirens wailed in the distance, approaching with calculated delay. The fire department arrived 23 minutes after ignition, long enough to ensure total destruction, precisely timed to prevent spread to neighboring buildings. They moved with professional efficiency, containing rather than extinguishing, protecting Harlem's other properties while the Midnight Palace collapsed into smoking rubble. As Tommy stood devastated on the sidewalk, a black Packard rolled slowly to the curb. The rear window descended, revealing Junie Byard's impassive face. No words were exchanged. Junie simply extended a gloved hand and placed a single object on the curbstone, a white rose, its petals charred black at the edges. The window rose. The car disappeared into darkness. Fire marshals arrived at dawn, conducting their investigation with bureaucratic thoroughness. They found overloaded circuits, expired safety certificates, and poor maintenance practices. No accelerant traces. No signs of forced entry. The official report documented accidental fire caused by electrical failure and owner negligence. Insurance claims would be denied. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at Tommy's cousin's apartment in Queens, where he'd been sleeping on a couch. Inside was an itemized bill, $4,847.32, for fire department services rendered. At the bottom, written in elegant cursive script, "Respect has a price." This was just the down payment. The management. Tommy's hands trembled as he read those words, understanding with absolute clarity that his nightmare wasn't ending. It was evolving. The fire had been merely the opening statement in a negotiation he had already lost. The systematic destruction of Tommy Torino's life accelerated with bureaucratic precision. On August 17th, Metropolitan Insurance Company denied his claim, citing the 17 fire code violations documented in the marshal's report. $15,000 in coverage evaporated with a stamped letter. 2 days later, Vincent Scarpelli appeared at Tommy's cousin's apartment, demanding immediate repayment, $23,000, due within 30 days. The heirs opened a formal inquiry into unreported gambling income the same week. The walls closed from every direction simultaneously. Within 2 weeks, Tommy was liquidating everything. His Cadillac sold for $800 to satisfy Scarpella's immediate demands. His mother's jewelry disappeared to a pawnbroker. The charred lot where the Midnight Palace once stood went to auction for $12,000, purchased by an anonymous buyer represented by a downtown law firm. Tommy signed the papers with trembling hands, knowing he was being robbed, but lacking leverage to negotiate. Desperation finally cracked his pride. Through intermediaries in the numbers racket, Tommy attempted to reach Bumpy Johnson, offering the apology he should have delivered weeks earlier. The response returned within hours, delivered verbally with clinical finality. "The classroom is closed. The lesson has been taught. There is nothing left to say." He wasn't even worth the time required to accept an apology. The ripple effect spread through Harlem's business community like gospel. Every club owner, bar operator, and establishment touching the underground economy absorbed the message without a single word being spoken. A new standard of respect had been established, enforced not with bullets, but with systematic destruction. Mayme Johnson's name became synonymous with untouchable royalty. Smart operators adjusted their policies quietly. The foolish left. By mid-September, Tommy Torino had vanished from Manhattan entirely. He retreated to Corona, Queens, moving into his cousin's apartment above a grocery store on Junction Boulevard. He stocked shelves, swept floors, and avoided eye contact with customers who might recognize him. At 35, he was forever marked as the man who learned too late that some people are untouchable. His name became shorthand for catastrophic failure. 6 months later, in February 1956, the Renaissance Room opened on the lot where the Midnight Palace once stood. The establishment featured Art Deco styling and management by a consortium of respected Harlem businessmen. Opening night drew politicians, entertainers, and the neighborhood's most influential citizens. The first patrons seated in the VIP section were Bumpy and Mayme Johnson. She wore emerald silk. He wore his customary dark suit. They were escorted to their table without hesitation, delay, or question. Glasses raised, doors held, eyes attentive. The standard had been restored. In a city dump miles away, the charred remains of the original Midnight Palace sign lay buried beneath construction debris, its neon tubing twisted into meaningless shapes. In Bumpy Johnson's Harlem, respect wasn't a courtesy, it was currency, and those who tried to spend what they hadn't earned paid with everything they owned. The ashes of the Midnight Palace served as a permanent reminder. Some lines should never be crossed, and some names should never be disrespected. The photograph captured them mid-dance at the Renaissance Room's grand opening, the image of a queen who never doubted her king's devotion. Monday, March 16th, 10:00 a.m. The same NBC studio that had hosted Richard Halverton's career suicide 4 nights earlier now buzzed with predatory anticipation. Reporters packed every available space, cameras positioned like weapons waiting to document whatever scandal had forced this emergency gathering. The air carried the metallic scent of hot lights and the nervous energy of journalists who sensed a feeding frenzy about to begin. When Halverton emerged from behind the velvet curtains, the transformation was immediate and shocking. 4 days had carved a decade into his face. His skin carried the gray pallor of sleepless terror, the confident campaign tan replaced by the complexion of a man who had stared into an abyss. His expensive suit hung loose on a frame that seemed to have physically contracted under systematic pressure. Most conspicuous was his left hand, wrapped in heavy white bandages and cradled against his chest like evidence of something unspeakable. He approached the microphone with none of the swagger that had defined his political existence. His right hand gripped the podium with such desperate force that his knuckles bleached white against the wood. When he spoke, his voice was flat and mechanical, reading from a prepared statement with the cadence of a man executing his own sentence. The statement lasted exactly 93 seconds. Clinical, rehearsed, devastating. Immediate withdrawal from the gubernatorial race, resignation from Congress effective at midnight, departure from New York for unspecified personal health reasons. The bandaged hand resulted from a household accident, he claimed, though the tremor in his voice suggested trauma that extended far beyond broken fingers. No questions would be accepted. The microphone went dead before the press corps could process what they had witnessed. Chaos erupted as journalists shouted over each other, demanding explanations for the inexplicable collapse. Halverton stood frozen for 8 seconds, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the cameras, before his campaign manager physically guided him toward the exit. The image that would run in newspapers showed a broken man fleeing his own press conference, his bandaged hand pressed against his chest like a badge of defeat. Within hours, political analysts manufactured theories to fill the void. Health crisis, financial scandal, federal investigation, marital problems. Every speculation missed the truth, because the truth existed in a world these analysts refused to acknowledge. Nobody connected his inflammatory television appearance to his systematic destruction. The name Bumpy Johnson never appeared in any mainstream coverage. By Wednesday, Richard Halverton had vanished from New York as completely as if he had never existed. Empty offices, disconnected phone lines, no forwarding address. By Friday, newer scandals had consumed the news cycle, and his story faded into archived newspaper clippings that historians would occasionally reference when documenting the chaotic political landscape of 1959. But in Harlem, the message resonated with crystalline clarity. In barbershops and corner establishments, on stoops and in social clubs, the story spread with embellishments that only enhanced its power. How Bumpy Johnson had ended a political career in 72 hours without firing a single shot, using only pressure, precision, and the systematic application of consequences to defend community honor against a man who believed privilege made him untouchable. 3 weeks later, an anonymous donation of $25,000 arrived at the Harlem Community Center on 125th Street. The accompanying note requested the funds be attributed to Richard Halverton in recognition of his support for neighborhood improvement. It was Bumpy's final signature, a calculated insult disguised as charity, forcing Halverton's name to be permanently associated with supporting the very people he had called animals. The story of Richard Halverton exists as a footnote in history books, if it appears at all. But in Harlem, the legend survives as a reminder that respect isn't given, it's enforced. In 1959, nobody enforced it better than Bumpy Johnson. How many other politicians learned this lesson the hard way? How many careers ended quietly because someone forgot that power without respect is just noise? The answers are buried in police reports never filed and newspaper stories never written. But the legend endures. Disrespect has a price, and some debts can only be paid in full.